soon as the CDs came around, everybody said, look at these are great, they're digital, it's optical, I can throw them around, they don't scratch like LPs, my LPs warp, oh, these are great, they're portable, I can store, well, not too much media on it, but as much as LPs, and they're small, and I can have lots of them, and unfortunately, it just didn't sound very good. CDs took a digital snapshot of a continuous, smooth, complex waveform. So in between, you'd get a little bit of information, and as you went higher in frequency, you'd get less information because the sampling rate for a CD, 44.1 kilohertz, pretty low, and half of that at the Nyquist frequency. You can really hear the loss of information in the overtone series for cymbals and percussion and the kinds of things that normally sound crisp and snappy now sound a little bit washed out. Now the bass is big, but unfortunately bass isn't everything. Really, we're looking for an overall experience, which is why LPs work so well, because the voices sound good and they sound natural. So digital sampling, especially at low rates like 44.1 kilohertz, cause some serious problems. You'd read in the columns in the audiophile magazines that this is below listeners' perception. Listeners can't really perceive the loss of information, and it wasn't really true. We in the studio could certainly perceive it. However, we could tell that digital was going to be the next big thing. So we had to give up our LPs. I didn't. I still have mine, and others have theirs, because LPs just sounded better. CDs were inexpensive to produce. They used less space on the shelf. They cost less to ship, more money, more profit, lower quality. And the CD sound quality was good enough for consumers. Consumers really couldn't tell the difference. Oh, you audiophiles in the studio, you know, most people don't really care. Losing a little quality is worth it because we can have something that doesn't warp when it gets hot. So the Philips CD project was really the beginning of the current trend of providing audio portability and storage at the expense of audio fidelity. Creating holes and gaps in the audio to increase the convenience and enhance portability is continuing now with compressed audio. So enter the MP3. So now we have a CD that has less information than we want to have, that less information that sounds good. And now we're going to take that little bit of information, significantly less than the original performance, and we're going to compress it down 70, 80, 90% loss of information. The big benefit for MP3 users, of course, is they could rip off a CD without having to buy it. So MP3 got real popular real fast. There was no way of keeping somebody from creating an MP3 from a CD. So essentially, someone with an MP3 compressor could take their PAL CD, compress it, publish it, and give it out to all their friends and look like the man or the woman. You know, unfortunately, we call those people bootleggers in our industry. The bootleggers could upload songs to a server, and no royalty went to the people that I work for with the big budgets, the people that funded that first webcast with huge amounts of money. Now, all of a sudden started selling less and less CDs, and they started having to drive Chevys instead of Porsches, and not good. You know, you don't want to put a star in a Chevy. You know, they're not happy. And I started getting less work because less money, less work. The whole industry kind of fell on its face, all because the MP3 using customers didn't want to pay royalties to the artist. But since the music was free now, listeners didn't really expect audio quality. It's free, right? You can put up with a lot. You've seen those videos that people stand with the cameras and, you know, you go, well, I'm not paying for it and it's brand new, so, you know, I'll deal with that guy in front with, you know, the hair and the popcorn. But unfortunately, the ripping process started the illegal portion of the audio distribution plan, and then the giants got in, Apple and folks thought, well, we better do this legally. Let's put some DRM in and figure out a way you can own your music. And it took lots and lots of years to create that legal sales model. Most of the legal downloads sold to consumers today are compressed down from the 1.411 megabits per second to 128, maybe 160 kilobits per second in terms of the bit rate, with up to 80–90% reduction in the audio file size. So now we have even more holes in the audio than we had with CDs. We thought CD was bad. We hadn't even imagined MP3 could be anywhere as close to being as bad as it actually is. But people get dumbed down. And it's like the frog in hot water. You just don't notice, and eventually quality is gone. One of the things I hear from people and get in arguments with people is they say, the CD is the master. Are you making the sound just like the CD? I mean, you say you want to make it sound like the original performance, and I say to them, wait a minute, the CD is terrible. I was at that performance. I actually helped create that CD. People just stand there and they don't know what to say, because unless you were in the process of creating the CD and then the MP3, which is really what streaming is. Streaming is creating PCM at a higher bit rate, usually 1.411 megabits or something like that, and then real-time encoding it down to the lower bit rate of 64, 96, or 128K. Unless you're involved in that process and you're there in the booth and you're listening to the concert on your monitors, and then you switch over to the computer that's your reference, and you go back and forth, there's a time lag, of course, because the internet's not real fast and there are hard drives involved. And unless you're involved in that process, you don't really know how bad an MP3 or WMA or AAC, or you pick your format, how bad it really is. But we did. And unfortunately, webcasting is a boring job. We had years of just sitting there for 6 and 8 hours listening to really incredibly bad audio that we're piping over the internet. So I said, okay, you guys are doing nothing. You're on the clock. Let's start working on this algorithm, and let's ask the fans what they like. So bring in your best stuff, let's hear it. So I got my engineers and scientists in, and I said, let's enhance the voice. Okay, sounds good. Okay, get some chatters online. Let's let the people tell us what they like about Bob Weir's voice. And people would say, yeah, it sounds good, except I hear cymbals now louder. So we had this incredible focus group of fans that wanted to help because they loved the stars, and they were talking to guys that were there with the stars. So we got the free focus group. Instead of flat and lifeless sound, we started creating something that sounded a little bit better. We actually were working on a project for Windham Hill in the 80s where we compared analog to digital, or high bit rate or high density audio to analog, not high bit rate, but high density audio to digital. And we rented the best analog and digital recording equipment available and spent months with scopes and analyzers, and took a look at a half-inch Studer tape versus a CD, and went back and forth. And there was no comparison. The people at Windham Hill that started the record label, it was a joke. We just walked around and we said, nobody's going to record on CD. This stuff is terrible. So all the original Windham Hill, which is one of the, I don't know if you know Windham Hill or not, but in the United States, one of the penultimate audiophile record labels called Windham Hill, and they have lots of artists, and audiophiles listen and drink wine and eat cheese and talk with one another about the nuances of the cymbals and the strings. And all of Windham Hill's projects were recorded on tape, not on digital. We had digital. It was the 80s. It was available, but they didn't want to lose that information that you lose when you sample at lower rates.